Paul has actually a distinguished career. He's originally from Toronto. He got a job at Xerox, which we'll get into in a couple minutes, and went down to the West Coast. He worked in the Valley, he worked in Seattle, worked in digital media, then he's now working in health. And he just recently returned to Toronto. And I think you've seen quite a bit of success. You've been part of 2 acquisitions. And so when I met Paul, I said, we have to have him on stage. We have to share some knowledge and see what's, so I'm very honored to have you here. Oh, we can't give you a working mic apparently. Let's try it. Get past it here.
And thank you, Jason.
See, Jason can not only remember stuff, but he got working mics. So, Paul, maybe let's start. You grew up in Toronto. You started working at Xerox. I don't know if everyone here knows who Xerox is. They used to be a big tech company in the 90s.
It's Alex's way of saying that I'm old. That's really the subtext.
But you had a job here, and they took you down to the Valley. So how did you end up transitioning from a job in Toronto down to the Valley? Like, what was that progression like?
Yeah, so first of all, just thank you, Alex, Jason, everyone being here, and also just Mila and Emil, just what you shared. The experience is, I think, just reinforcing the kind of talent that is here in Canada, and clearly glad to be back. So when I graduated, I went to University of Toronto, did my first startup there, and when I graduated, I knew I wanted to get involved in tech. But my first sort of real job was at Xerox, or Xsoft, which was the commercial division of the Palo Alto Research Center, or Xerox PARC. And the reason that I went there, this is mid-90s, was that it was really at the foundation of a lot of the technology that we see today. The Ethernet, Windows devices, et cetera, it was all developed at Xerox. And after about a year or so there, I realized that I wanted to really get in on the ground floor, and I wanted to get a transfer. And they were like, you should make your way up the corporate ranks. And I'm like, this is really not for me. I want to get back in and build some things. And so I left, and I didn't get transferred. I just packed up and went west, young man, and ended up short stint in DC, but then ended up in the Bay Area in 1996. So it was right at the very beginning of Internet 1.0, and that's how I got down to the Valley.
And when you made yourself down in the Valley, you went to, I think it was Network 24.
So I did an early search company, and then I met my co-founder, who was an engineer at Network 24. And so we were one of the early pioneering sort of video management platforms. This is well before YouTube. But like postage site stamp, streaming video, and we created the whole back-end broadcast administrative system for managing delivery of video.
So that was the start of a long period in digital media. And how did you know that's where the prize was? What excited you about transforming media, digitizing it, and starting a company in that space?
It was really I started in search first because I did my degree in economics, and I remember my final sort of paper was on the Industrial Revolution and seeing kind of how the transition of technology, how it would ripple. And with this whole information, I realized the first challenge that people would need to solve is how do you find some things. I did not realize that it would take even much longer to really fully monetize it. So I ended up leaving search after a few years and got excited about this new broadcast medium that would democratize the ability to tell stories, no longer have it be constrained by just big big cable companies. And that's where I turned into a focus around, okay, I think this postage stamp video, broadband's gonna get better, you're gonna need tools to manage it. And that's what my co-founder Dan and I started to work on.
And how did you find Dan? You're not from the Bay Area. As you heard before, there was a question about how do you find the right co-founder. It's one of the things I probably get most often in my inbox. I'm looking for a technical co-founder, and you did it. How did you do that?
A lot of just kind of trial and error. Now, it was a special time at that point in San Francisco, in that area. It had not quite as formalized as what you're doing here with TechTO, but there were a lot of different events, and then you just started to meet people. And for me, it was really, I didn't network in the sense of being so intentional that I wanted to go out, but I would go out, and when I would meet people, it would be really, who do you gravitate towards? Like, who do you have an authentic connection with? And Dan and I met. He was from the Midwest, and I think that had something to do with it. He and I joked about this because I was still Canadian and still am, even though I was, in the belly of the beast at that time. And so there was a lot of hype that was going around. People were raising tens of millions of dollars and, just the back of a napkin. And he and I just kept looking at this and saying, we want to build real technology, real customers, real revenue. And so I think we had values alignment, which helped.
So you wanted to build a real company. So what happened to that company? Tell us a bit about the journey.
Yeah, so the short story of it is 3 of us. We grew to 60 people. We raised a Series A, and back then a Series A of $5.5 million was like, oh my God, that's like, and it took us about 4.5 months to do that, start to finish. A lot of no's as well. That just goes with the territory. And that was September of 1999. And by the time we'd raised the money, about a month later, we had a board meeting and I wrote a memo. And that memo, I said, I'm concerned that we are a product and not a company. And what I meant by that was a lot had changed from when we had started to when we had actually raised the capital. And I started to look at these big companies, Microsoft, Real Networks, and then there were the content delivery networks. And I said, if I'm in their shoes, I can look around the corner and say 12 to 18 months, what we're building, they're going to want to build into their stack. So can we outpace them? Or do we need to figure out how to position ourselves for optionality? And that's what we ended up doing. That's another story of just, companies don't get bought, right? You sell them, or maybe it's the other way around, but we wanted to not be up for sale. We really wanted to be acquired by the right partner in that case. And so in November, December of that year, Microsoft came knocking, and then Akamai came knocking. There was a little bit of a bidding process, and we were acquired for 12 times. So it was a 200+ million exit, and that ended up being right 3 months before the NASDAQ cratered and the whole Internet 1.0. Our board was resistant to it, but we were fortunate that we owned enough of the company that we did not have to listen to the governance of the board. We heard them, but we didn't have to follow their advice. And it ended up being, for many years, for our investors at that time, we were their highest returning IRR, right? So kicking and screaming, we made them money.
Shows you what investors know sometimes. I could probably go half an hour in just different directions from that little story there, but a couple quick questions. One is, at that time, what were you selling? How many customers did you have? Was it a technology purchase? Like, how did you sell that company? What got the acquirers interested? Was it customers, technology, the team?
I think it was a combination. I think it was first the technology. They recognized as well, as we started to dig into it, that this was on their roadmap, and we had cracked a code here. They could replicate it, but it would take time. Smart people, they would make similar mistakes. The other piece here was that the acquiring company at that time, Akamai, the president of that company, I had met him about 5 years earlier. And this is a lesson, or just something that you realize how small the world is. You end up meeting somebody and you think, will they ever kind of come back in your life? You never know. Best to just treat people really well. And in this case, when I contacted or reconnected with the CEO or the president of Akamai, it was really under I think you'd be interested in what we're doing. We need a distribution partner. And then he filled in the gaps of, oh, this would make sense.
So you basically said you had a product for him to sell.
Yeah.
And he said, okay, we can get more revenue from our customers. Easy.
It would accelerate their roadmap.
So shortly after that, a couple interesting things. One is you stayed for Akamai for a while.
Yeah.
I'd like to hear a bit about that. But then you actually, I didn't notice that Microsoft was the other bidder. You then went up to Seattle after. So a couple questions here. When why did you stay at Akamai, and then how did you make the most of that time? And then why did you go to the big tech in Seattle? Like, they were like the most hated company in the time.
They were. So I stayed at Akamai for about 18 months. There was no earnout, which was great. So I could have left at any point in time. The reason that I stayed was incredibly smart people that were there. And then after 18 months, I felt like I had sort of maxed out. It had been a 8-year run. There was also some personal things. I had been married. I was getting a divorce. I had a young family. So I just needed time. And so I took a year break. And then when I was thinking about what I wanted to do next, I wanted to do another startup, but I didn't know what I wanted to do. And to Mila's point about sort of a founder market or founder problem fit, I hadn't found that yet. And then the Microsoft folks who had tried to acquire the company knew that I was on the market. I had stayed in contact with them. And then they said, why don't you come up? We're doing some interesting things in digital media. We're in a different place than we were 2 years ago. And we're starting this division that we want to have somebody liaison between Redmond and Hollywood. And I think it was, the real reason is I knew how to tie a bow tie. So I could go to like black, I think it was just that. They're like, you're technical enough that you could work with us here and you can, but yeah, so that's how I ended up joining Microsoft. And I stayed there for 4 years. And I kind of view that as my sort of postgraduate education because it was just incredibly smart people who were there as well. It was dysfunctional in many respects, but to be able to operate at that level of scale, I learned a lot as well.
So you have success with a big digital media exit. You work for Microsoft, know everyone in Hollywood. So you do what I would naturally have guessed. Next is start a mental health startup. So why the pivot? Why the health? Did you see, this is 2010. It's definitely before everyone started talking about the digitizing of health, especially mental health. Why start Be Life? What was the inspiration there? Why make that sort of almost a career transition?
Yeah, the seeds for that were planted by kind of the central figure in my life, who is my mom. So I was raised by a single mom. Born in England, we came here when I was a kid, and then she was a mental health professional, and she used to work at what is now CAMH. It was Clark Institute of Psychiatry before that. So I say this, that I was fortunate enough to be raised in a household where mental health was at parity with physical health, well before where we are now, like the destigmatization. I still think we have a long way to go, but we're much further along in that conversation around mental health and what it means. And so I was very early at that point. After, almost 10, 15 years in digital media, I could stay in that world, but it didn't feel like it was my purpose. It didn't feel like I was put on this earth to do another deal with a big studio or something else. So I thought, how do I take everything that I've learned about, product, strategy, go-to-market, building great teams, raising capital, and apply it to a big problem? And so that was focusing on health. So
I got a few more questions here before we open to our audience. You didn't have founder market fit. So how did you get over that with raising? Did people say, okay, and meant, like, again, it wasn't like a hot space. It wasn't like you're going to start a Web3. Who cares? You've had a success. We'll give you money. But mental health and, how'd you get to raise
Yeah, so I think for that one, I had more founder market fit than maybe I even knew it at the time, because I had started my own personal practice of meditation in like 10 years prior. And so with that, and I remember my first, so True Ventures, who now I'm a venture scout with, but they invested in my company. And when I met with one of the co-founders of the firm, I think he was taken by the fact that I'd been trying to apply this to myself, and then now thinking about ways that we could scale this and deliver it in a consumable, take off some of the wrappings that might get in the way of people thinking about this for their own life. Any of the spiritual stuff that they might not be ready for. So I think from that perspective, I had founder market fit from living my own path.
So now you're, pursuing something that you're passionate about, not that you weren't passionate about digital media. You sell the company again. What happened?
Yeah. So healthcare's hard. It's just really...
Harder than digital media?
Yeah, it's much harder. Those big regulated industries where the incentives are not clearly aligned, so you can have the greatest solution, but then if you can't figure out who's going to pay for it, right? So many ideas. So we were direct to consumer. We partnered with some great brands, the Oprah Winfrey Network, Huffington Post, Deepak Chopra, got in front of many people, but then it was like a one-time thing. So each time you had to go and do it again. So the customer acquisition costs. So then we found some clinical care pathways and realized that 1 + 1 could equal something more. And I sold the company and integrated it into a chronic condition management company that was focused on diabetes, hypertension, because all of those conditions have a behavioral health component, right? It's not just your physiology, it's how the mind-body connection works. And so that made sense. We grew that. We were doing 5 million ARR. And then 2019, and then my mom got sick, and that's what precipitated my return back to Canada.
So one question on your return. So you came back, Koru incubated the company. Koru is basically joint venture with, I think, BCG. Teachers and BCG. Yeah. And it's Elovee is another, I guess, health company, mental health company. What enticed you to take a hard gun role, let's call it?
Yeah, so when I got back, I wasn't sure what I was going to do, got connected, met with the folks from Teachers and Koru. The initial idea for Elovee was very different. It was a AI avatar of a family member powered by conversational technology AI and that's actually when I met Jason. We have pivoted significantly from that. And why I took the job or the role was, I said, I'm not sure if this idea is the one that's going to win. But the problem exists. It's a huge problem. Older adults have been left behind by technology. The number one health concern of most older adults is cognitive decline, dementia. There are not enough trained clinicians and caregivers to solve this problem. There is no magic pill yet. So there's a role for technology to augment the delivery of care and provide, digital therapeutics. And I said, if you're going to support me, and if it's this, that's great, because then it's just been de-risked. But if it's not that, I need latitude to find where the product market fit is, and they've been great partners from that perspective.
Right. Just one last question before I open it to the audience. Touch on the True Venture Scout program. I think your True Venture Scout, I know one thing that you're trying to help them with is diversity.
Yes. So
what are you doing there, and how are you trying to address the need for more diversity in the ecosystem?
Yeah, so True Ventures is an early stage VC based in the Bay Area. They've done a lot of deals in Canada. They love Toronto. It was one of the things that they were thinking very broadly. As it relates to diversity, it's just something that I talked with the founders of True about, that they have this annual founder camp, and they bring all the CEOs of their portfolio companies together in a very safe space to just talk about the journey, how lonely it can be, how scary it can be, and just to learn from each other. One of the things we say at True is that the answer is in the room. Meaning if you're going through something, somebody else has probably gone through it, or they can empathize. And I think that's absolutely powerful, very profound. But one of the challenges that I saw, and they saw as well, is that from year after year that I would go to this, I'd look around and it wouldn't be as diverse as it could be. And I was like, we're just leaving talent and money, on the table. So they wanted to, and have been intentional about bringing in more female founders and more founders of color. And then, to do that, they have to open up their network. And when I got back here, connecting with TechTO was something that was important to me. So I feel really excited to have this opportunity. I've connected with the folks at DMZ, and then just otherwise, just trying to, be part of the community and let folks know that True is there and wants to invest in, talented founders from wherever backgrounds that they come from.
Paul, thank you so much. I could probably ask you 3 hours more of questions, but I'll spare the audience and open it to Q&A. Who has the first question? be shy.
Hey, it's Josh, the guy that found this place on the internet. I also lived in California and moved back here. What do you find is the biggest difference between starting a company in the Valley and starting a company in Toronto? And what are things that you're seeing evolve over time now that Toronto's tech scene has significantly grown over the past number of years?
Yeah, I still think that the concentration in the Valley, things can just happen faster than they do here. And a willingness to think about, the realm of the possible. But it's clearly changing here. I mean, I just have, N of one perspective, but as I've been meeting more people over the last year and being back and settled post-pandemic, I think that gap is closing.
Any tips on what we can do to improve the ecosystem? It's Alex. I'm going to ask that. Just jump on that question.
Alice wants shoes.
Oh.
What?
What was it?
What can Canadians or Torontonians do better?
I think Jason, you were saying something about not having fear, like just being fearless. That's really it. I just think peace, order, and good government versus life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Like the credos just sort of have this deep, subtle impact on us, an effect on us. And Emil said something really, I think, insightful in flipping it. That takes courage to say, I'm going to be interviewing you, right? When you don't know when you're going to make payroll. But it's a mentality. And that is it's definitely part on the other side of the border that I think if more of us embrace that, because we're going to do the work, right? And that's the thing where I talk to other investors, and True included, they love investing in Canadian companies because the work ethic, so if we match that with courage and fearlessness, century's ours.
Well, Jason, you have another question there?
Last question.
Hey, Paul. I am trying to build something in the lottery industry, which is incredibly regulated, as you've spoken about regulations. Then people actually relate them to the healthcare industry. How did you overcome, which is my main sort of objection by VCs, how did you overcome regulations and sort of that fear of people not wanting to get involved with you because of something that's highly regulated?
Yeah. So certain things you can do in terms of just being knowledgeable, smart, understanding the regulatory pathways and where the points of leverage are. Some of it's also just timing. And so I think with the transition with a lot of the online gaming and so forth, I would guess, I don't know much about your space, but that's some of the macro trends that were helpful. So when I look at 2010 and what I was doing in digital health versus now, and you can just look at how much money's gone into the space. It's night and day. I was almost too early in 2010, and I had to ride out for the market to catch up. So I think you have to just be clear-eyed and making sure that as you understand those regulatory pathways, that you're not too early, because even with that knowledge, VCs are always looking at what's going to happen within the next 12 months, right, towards the blue ocean concept.
Paul, thank you so much.
Paul, thank you so much. Round of applause.